Wherever you are, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, we're glad that you've tuned in or are watching live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James. I'm your host today. This is number 168 since the beginning of the pandemic, if you're still counting. And this is for the week of September 2nd in the year 2023. Today, we're going to have Peter Hudis come on, and he's going to talk a little bit about an event that's coming up with peace activists from both Russia and Ukraine, as well as John Ballantyne and the Crazy Heart Band. And he's going to talk a little bit about his music and some events coming up. And then we're going to have our good friend of the show, Don Rose, coming on. He just had a feature on Channel 2, or a segment on Channel 2 News, that would be CBS, about the March on Washington in 1963, 60 years later. And he and I will talk a little bit about that because we were both there. The best thing that happened to me this week was going with my son, Hal, who was the engineer of the show, out to Logan Square to the Zine Fest. And this is an annual event, and it's put on by Oscar Areola and a few other people. Logan Square was really bustling. It's pretty yucked up compared to when I lived out there in the days. There on Logan Boulevard were lots and lots of farmers market activities going on. There had been word that they were going to cancel it for a week because the organizers in the city were at odds about safety precautions and expansion, but it was full tilt, as well as a lot of other things, a big bicycle ride, lots of people out prancing around. I had a great time telling stories and selling my books and photos. On the not so good front, just check out the news. Lots of shootings. We had a shooting in Jacksonville that was really tragic. Very blatantly, a racist carried it out. Then he killed himself. And at the University of North Carolina, there was a shooting, and we have an unresolved shooting here in Chicago. There are probably a few, but there's one that happened at the White Sox ball game last week. So there's a lot of intrigue around that. On the environment, the Environmental Protection Agency has just revised a key rule to comply with a sweeping Supreme Court ruling from earlier this year that could strip federal protection from up to 63% of the nation's wetlands. And, while Biden may take some hit for the EPA doing this, they had to do it because of what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court is something to continue watching because it affects us all, and it's been pretty negativo for a while. A little bit more on the environment. I got this from Earth Justice. Steel production is highly polluting. The 10 steel mills operating in the United States release more than 500 tons. That's 500 tons of toxic metals into the air of neighboring communities each year. Despite the need for stronger protections, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has proposed a weak rule regulating steel mill emissions. So we're being urged to contact the EPA and demand that they strengthen this rule. A little interesting thing about Chicago on the news last night, which would have been Tuesday because we are recording it on Wednesday, the 30th, another alligator was found in the Chicago River. And it's been 2 weeks since there was another one that was found. So the hope is that they're going to catch all the alligators they can, maybe send them back to Florida. Or maybe if the bears move, they can call themselves the Arlington Heights Alligators. On the sports front, in all seriousness, the Cubs are still in the hunt. The Sox have been doing not very well, but as we record this, they are up 7-4 over Baltimore. The Bears start this weekend, and we'll see. All the teams have cut their rosters down to 53, and football season is upon us. And if you're into tennis, the U.S. Open is going on, and I've been watching Coco Gauff, who just won her match today. Also, just as I was looking at my phone, I got this. It's 50 years since the coup in Chile. And that's when Salvador Allende, a socialist, democratically elected, was overthrown by Pinochet, probably with the backing of the U.S. I remember the day it happened. I was driving up Milwaukee Avenue to Schurz High School to sell Rising Up Angries. And it came on the radio that Allende had been killed in defending himself and a group of people in his office. So there are now 1,469 disappeared people that during that period of military rule from 1973 to 90. So it's a little history lesson that we've had a lot of things going on, and military coups way back in the day. They continue today. There's a few going on in Africa right now. But Allende was really a wonderful guy and a tragic situation. It's good that the government in Chile is looking into these, because there's a lot of families trying to find out what happened to their loved ones. If you missed last week's show, you can get it at youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos. And we had our old pal Michael Piranha McGraw, came out of Kelly High School, had a band called Killing Floor, later the Piranha Brothers. He's in Hawaii, and he gave us a report on the spirit of Hawaii and what's going on out there. We had another old pal, Carlos Cumpian, talking about Carlos Cortez, whose exhibit is up at the Mexican Museum of Fine Art until February. And we met Lou Hinkhouse from the Illinois Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. All of that is at youtube.com/heartlandmedia. So I think we're going to take a little musical break, and we're going to come right back with our first guest, Peter Hudis, and he's going to tell us about this wonderful event that they have put together. And it always gives me a lot of pleasure to bring on someone who's been on the show before. And this time it's the one, the only Peter Hudis, who is a professor at Oakton College here in Skokie and Des Plaines. And last time you were on, we talked about your book about Frantz Fanon, the African intellectual and activist that a lot of us back in the 60s read. I'm sure you've been doing a lot of stuff since then. You got a hold of me recently around an event that you're involved with, a tour of Ukrainian and Russian anti-war activists opposed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And you got an event coming up at Loyola. Why don't you tell us all about it, Peter?
Thank you very much. We hear a lot of debate and discussion, of course, from various points of view about this horrible invasion of Ukraine by Putin over the past year and the resistance of Ukrainians to it, for pro or con from different vantage points. But one thing we rarely hear are voices of Ukrainians, especially left-wing Ukrainians, especially democratic socialists in Ukraine, who oppose Putin's invasion. They don't support, however, the neoliberal policies of the Ukrainian government, and they certainly don't support many of the policies of the Western European countries and the United States, but they do support Ukraine's fight against Russia's invasion. We also don't hear a lot very often in the U.S. media or in the U.S. left, in addition for that matter, about the voices of opposition within Russia. That is, there's huge numbers of people who have left Russia since the invasion began, and there's huge numbers of people large numbers who oppose the war, but their voices often aren't heard. This event at Loyola, which is Tuesday, September 5th at 6:30 p.m. in Damon Student Center Cinema, which is 6511 North Sheridan Road. Damon Student Center Cinema. It's the new building that they built there, right when you walk into the entrance at the Lakeshore campus on the right side, is going to be different in that it's bringing together both Ukrainians who are supporting the struggle against Putin's Russia and Russians who are supporting Ukrainian struggle against Russia, and on the same platform together. And that's a very unusual sort of event. And I think it's going to be a really exciting meeting. And there's going to be 3 speakers, 2 from Ukraine, 1 from Russia, and all of them serious scholars as well as activists.
And one of them is in the States, usually, at Tulane, Denia Bondar.
Yes, Denis Bondar is a professor of physics at Tulane University. He's also a member of Socialistny Ruch, which is a Ukrainian democratic socialist organization connected with the journal Spilna, which means commune in English. And this is the most important left-wing journal that is published in Ukraine. It's been published there for about 3 or 4 years now. And these are social activists in the feminist movement, in the labor movement in Ukraine, in the socialist movement in Ukraine, small as it is, but nevertheless a significant force in a very, very serious theoretical journal. He is also connected with that tendency. The other 2 speakers are also from Ukraine, is Hanna Perikota, who is now in Switzerland at the Swiss-based Committee in Solidarity with Ukrainian People. She is a researcher at the University of Lausanne. And the 3rd speaker, somebody who some of your listeners may know about, Ilya Butrykskis, who is an exile from Russia. He's written a very, very important book called Dissonance Among Dissidents, Ideology, Politics, and the Left in Post-Soviet Russia. It's considered one of the most serious radical left commentators and theorists within Russia who unfortunately was forced to leave the country because of the political repression meted out towards critics of Putin's regime from the left, certainly.
Peter Hudis, how did this event come to be? I know it's a kind of a national tour, but how did you get involved with it? And how did you end up bringing them to Chicago?
Well, last year in 2022, Yulia Yurichenko, who is a very important book on Ukraine, she's Ukrainian herself, teaches in London, was in exile from Ukraine, gave a talk at the Socialism 2022 conference on the Ukrainian struggle, about opposition to Putin's invasion, etc. And it was a really wonderful talk that she gave. Afterwards, a number of us got together with her, and we discussed following through from her talk to try to show how can we in the United States build solidarity with the struggle against Putin's invasion at a time when many in the left are refraining from doing this for various reasons. And so from that, at her inspiration, within a few months, we helped form a new organization called the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which is progressive activists in the United States. It includes Bill Fletcher, for instance, who I think you know. It includes Barbara Smith, the co-founder of the Combahee River Collective. It includes Howie Hawkins, who was the Green Party candidate for president back in 2000, and a number of other prominent left activists and academics and scholars came together, and we've been involved in various activities over the past 8 months or so in developing solidarity actions with Ukraine. And as part of that, we decided to try to do a national tour of the Ukrainian and Russian spokespersons that we were in contact with, both inside and outside of Ukraine. And so a national tour was organized, which is going to start here in Chicago. The three of them are first going to speak at the Socialism 2023 conference at McCormick Place on September 3rd. And then on September 5th, they're going to speak at Loyola. That's going to be an open meeting, free admission, etc. Then they're going to head to New York, and they're going to be giving a talk there, and then heading to the West Coast and be speaking in the Bay Area. They unfortunately can't stay in the U.S., except for Dennis Banda, for too long. So that will be the three cities of the tour, but it'll be a really momentous event, this tour.
Fill us in a little bit on where the left in this country is at on Ukraine. I know I've had some friends who've been on the show who are pretty critical of Biden and the invasion, other people who are supporting it. You know, I got to say, without knowing a lot of the details about more recent politics in Ukraine, I just kind of vehemently am in opposition to Putin and Russia. I did visit the Soviet Union back in the day. I think they played a really important part in world history, but they've been an imperialist power in many ways and pretty negative. But I also know that Ukraine has a history of some pretty right-wing activity in their own past. Give us a little overview from your perspective as a leftist.
Yes, there's no question that Ukraine has a very checkered history, but we should keep in mind that much of the propaganda that is coming from Putin, that Ukraine is a Nazi government, that it's predominantly fascist or right-wingers, far right-wingers, etc., or, which of course Putin argues, Ukraine has no right to exist. It was never really meant to be an independent country. He blames Lenin for creating Ukraine as a semi-independent member of the Soviet Union and quasi-independent, and wants to erase that independence. I think this is unfortunate that this kind of propaganda in line of Putin has, among many in the left, been adopted and accepted, even when they oppose or criticize Putin's invasion. For instance, you hear very often, well, the Ukrainian government is a fascistic government. It's simply not true. The far right, there is a far right wing in Ukraine, and that's a dangerous force. In the last presidential elections, the far right won 3.2% of the popular vote. In a popular vote in which 70% of the population voted for a right of center candidate, equivalent to basically Macron in France, or even maybe Biden in America, Zelensky, who got 70% of the vote. Now, you realize the far right in Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, gets a lot more than 3.2% of the vote. The National Front in France gets more than 3.2%. The neo-fascists and the fascists in many European countries are far larger than in Ukraine. So when I tell people, well, wait a second, you say the government of Ukraine is full of fascists, could you name me some of them? And they can't, because there aren't any, okay? So we have to avoid buying these kind of myths. A second myth is that the 2014 Maidan Square protest that brought down Putin's ally, who was an oligarch running Ukraine and an ally of the Kremlin, and pushed out him in favor of a more democratic leader, that this was a right-wing CIA-inspired or even NATO-inspired virtual coup d'etat. This is not true. The 2014 Maidan movement came out of the Occupy movement that started in the United States. It was inspired by the same kinds of basic principles. And yes, it had many people who were part of it, some left-wing, some right-wing, some moderate, some undecided. But it was a citizens' movement to democratize Ukraine. This is why Putin has invaded Ukraine, not because NATO is on his borders. NATO's been on his borders, has expanded its borders 20 years ago, and he didn't start a war. What he's terrified about is the spread of democracy. That's why he invaded Kazakhstan last year. He invaded Belarus last year. In both places, there were strong democratic movements that he helped crush. There was a democratic or quasi-democratic government in Ukraine, a flawed democratic government, but that's a threat to Putin because he doesn't want that democracy spilling off into Russia in any way. That's why he invaded, to put an end to these even limited efforts of expressions of democracy. So the unfortunate thing is a lot of people in the left, even prominent figures like Noam Chomsky or Medea Benjamin, have failed to come out unreservedly in support of the fact that Ukrainians are now all united, fighting for their lives against Russia. And they're not worried about NATO right now, nor understandably, they're worried about the bombs falling on them from Moscow.
Peter, what's your sense of how the war is going? I saw a piece today talked about Putin feeling the pinch a little bit from the sanctions. For a while, it seemed like he kept rolling. But what's your sense of where the war is going? I know that we have this advance by the Ukrainian troops. It's slow. It's succeeding. It's not succeeding. I'm a little confused. I'd love to hear it. I did visit. I want to say it before I forget. I did visit the Ukraine when I went to the Soviet Union with Athletes United for Peace. I played baseball in Donetsk. I hit a double, and it was dreary and gray over there in the Ukraine then. And I'm not just talking the weather. I'm just talking the vibe. What's your sense of where the war is at and what we might expect?
Very good. Well, first of all, I have to say, Ukraine is largely considered to be the global south within the global north. It's the poorest part of Europe, especially Western Ukraine, and has been the poorest part of Europe for many, many decades. In terms of how the war is going, though, I should say that, well, first of all, Putin thought he was going to win this war in a couple of days or a few weeks, right? And Ukrainians put up a spirited resistance. When I say the Ukrainians, I'm not speaking just of Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians. I'm talking about the significant number of Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Ukraine. They have overwhelmingly supported the Zelensky government's military operation, defense of Ukraine against Russia. There's been not a single battalion of Russian-speaking soldiers that have defected over to the Russian side. Now, the war has not, since then, since they held back the Russians, which nobody expected the Ukrainians could do, and that was before the United States sent them significant military aid, or NATO sent them much aid, there's been more of a stalemate because it's easier to fight defensively very often than offensively, of course, right? One of the handicaps, so the war is going more difficultly for the Ukrainian side now than it was last year. One of the reasons it's going more difficultly, however, is that despite all the talk about some people act like, well, the United States has just opened the piggy bank for the Ukrainians and sending them every weapon imaginable. In fact, they still have not sent them fighter planes. Now, in modern warfare, how do you win or even defend yourself against an invader without air force, without air superiority? And the lack of that support, even now, Biden has recently said, well, we're going to give them F-16s, but they first have to learn English. They first have to get training. It's not going to show up in another 2 years. That doesn't help them now. Only recently did they get advanced U.S. tanks from NATO or from the United States. So they've been at a severe disadvantage. It's amazing the Ukrainians have done as good as they have, given the extreme limitations they're under. So the problem is not they've been overwhelmed with arms from the Western powers. The Western powers have been grudgingly giving them here or there, but what they really need is actually elements of military support like air power that they're basically having to create on their own, more or less. So what I'm hopeful, however, the thing that the Ukrainians have going for them, even though they're deficient in a lot of weapons and such, is that they're defending their own country. The Russian soldiers don't know what they're fighting for. Their morale is terrible. The Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. They're fighting for their lives. They know that if Putin takes over Ukraine, it's going to be they're not going to be able to breathe, and they're not going to have a national existence anymore. And so, in a certain sense, the fate of democracy in that part of the world depends on Ukraine coming out on top of the struggle.
Peter Hudis, this is really good, and I learned a lot more than I knew. I didn't know enough, and I'd like to invite you back ahead of time to give us another report. But give us one more time the information on the event that's happening on Tuesday night. Who's coming, where it's at, and what time to be there.
Okay, so show up Tuesday night, September 5th, this coming Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. at Loyola University Lakeshore Campus, 6511 Sheridan Road. It's in the Damon Student Center Cinema, Damon Student Center Cinema at 6:30 on Tuesday, September 5th. The three speakers are Hanna Perikova, Ilya Butrykskis, and Dennis Bondar. And this is going to be, the meeting is entitled Resisting Russian Imperialism, Ukraine's Struggle for Self-Determination. It will be an open forum. Each one of the three speakers will speak, and there'll be a discussion period. It's being sponsored by the Theology Department, Philosophy, Sociology, Global Studies, the Peace and Conflict Studies Program, and the Center of International Research at Loyola. There's a lot of folks at Loyola who came together to make this event possible, and we want to thank Loyola University for doing the work to make this meeting come into being.
Well, I hope to see you there, and I hope to have you back on the show talking more Ukraine and filling us in a little bit about, for a lot of the people who don't know who Frantz Fanon was, because that was a good book that you put together. Thanks so much.
Thank you, I'll be glad. Thank you. I'll be glad to come back anytime.
Right on, brother. Okay, everybody else, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland here on the left end of the dial. If that's the way you're getting it, we are on 88.7 WLUW.org on Saturday morning. We're at youtube.com/heartlandmedia/videos anytime you want it. Google and Spotify podcast. Enough of that short musical break. And we're coming back with the one, the only musician with the band called Crazy Heart, John Ballantyne. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 2nd. And it brings me a lot of pleasure to bring on now our musical component of this week's show. A guy I haven't met, but I'm looking forward to going out and hear him play. The one, the only John Ballantyne. And he has a band called the Crazy Heart Band. And he is from Scotland, which, so on my first hello to you. And you've been in Scotland, you're just back. How does a Scottish guy like you end up in Chicago being a C&W dude?
Well, in my formative years, when I was not even a teenager, my parents were big fans of country western music. They loved Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, Hank Williams, Hank Snow, a lot of guys named Hank had records in our house. So I heard it a lot, but especially on a Saturday night when they would come home from the local pub and they'd bring some of the friends with them. And I'd be trying to get to sleep, you know, I'd have some exams or something, but there was no way to get to sleep. They just pounded that country western music. So it was kind of subliminally installed in me. And I'm glad for it. It's been a great thing. The funny thing,
I love it. I used to listen to WWVA, Wheeling, West Virginia in the 50s. I'd get it late at night, and I remember listening to it. I got to say, you mentioned a lot of Hanks, but you didn't mention George Jones. I just wondered if you're a fan of George. He'd be my favorite.
Absolutely a fan of George Jones. It's hard to think of anyone who can deliver a song like that guy. You know, that's just a natural talent. Great admirer, and you know, like some of the songs comes to mind today. I started. He stopped loving her today. I mean, how good.
And Take Me, that one he did. Take Me to Siberia. The coldest winter of the winter time would be like spring in California if I knew you were mine. Anyhow, I'm sure you were influenced by a lot of these guys and women too. But why don't you give us a little bit of information about this event you're having at the Montrose Saloon. You will have had one earlier too, out at a place called Hey Nani, I think in Arlington Heights. And it's really talking about John Prine, Kris Kristofferson, and Goodman. Tell us
Steve
about
Goodman.
those guys and your appreciation and love and affection for them.
Well, we do a storytelling event. We do a lot of performance as a band. I mean, all the songs are there, but what I like to stress is we tell the stories, and anybody who ever went to see John Prine, for example, couldn't help but be impressed with, yeah, the songs are wonderful, unbeatable, but his storytelling was what drew so many people to him. And I try to kind of emulate that. I'll never be John Prine, but I try to tell a story. And the key to the thing is, one night in like early summer 1971, Kris Kristofferson came to town. He already became very famous. He was a big star. They came to play 3 nights at the Quiet Night on the north side. It was a place
I remember.
owned by Richard Hardy. And the guy that got the job to open was Stevie Goodman. So he gets to open for the big time Kris Kristofferson. And Kristofferson couldn't help but be impressed with Steve Goodman's songs. You know, City of New Orleans, for example, he hadn't recorded that yet. So Steve's just playing these songs, and Kristofferson comments, "These are great songs." And the great thing is, the great human aspect of the story is Steve Goodman says, "You know, you think these songs are good? You have to come and hear my pal John Prine. He's playing across town. I'm going to take you over there once we're done." And he did. He filled up a taxi cab with Kristofferson's entourage, and they piled in and drove over to where John Prine had just performed. And long story short, the next day, Kristofferson flies Steve Goodman and John Prine to New York and gets some signed for the record.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a great story.
It is. I'll give you a little footnote about Kris Kristofferson. I grew up in Connecticut, and one of my family's best friends was a woman named Martha Cogan, and she was a daughter of some muckraker journalists out of Oregon, but she was a babysitter for Kris Kristofferson. So okay. I heard she's no longer around. I can't get any more details. Maybe one of her kids. How about before we get you to sing a little bit of music and tell us the details of the Montrose Saloon event and what night and what people ought to expect?
Yeah, it's September 16th. It's a matinee show. We're going to do it at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, because you got to remember, this night when this all happened is 50 years ago now. So a lot of the people like me are interested in this. They don't want to be out late, and I'm fine with that. So we'll kick it off at 3 at Montrose Saloon, which is a great little music venue. $10 at the door. I mean,
it's on Montrose, right out near Rockwell, just
yes,
past
exactly.
California.
Exactly.
Yeah, I used to see it when it was first opening up, because there was a Korean bathhouse over there. It's no longer there, but I see it all the time.
Yeah, it's a great spot. Great spot. So September 16th, 3 p.m. We'll run the whole show. We try and set the scene as starting out in the Quiet Night, where Steve Goodman is opening for Kris Kristofferson. Then we do a full set of Kristofferson songs. Take a little break and change the scene to the Earl of Old Town, where John Prine had just finished performing. We do a set of John Prine's with lots of stories about the songs in between. And I have some information on very good authority. I became pals on Facebook with John Prine's first wife, Ann Carroll, who was there that night, and she's helped us out with a lot of obviously very accurate information, clear up some of the mysteries about that night. So,
well, you're a songwriter in your own right.
Yeah.
At this event, are you going to play any of your own tunes?
I typically don't, but people have suggested that. I mean, maybe I should. The whole essence of the show is reverence for these three guys. So I don't want to kind of horn in on that in any way. I'm a fan, big fan of the three guys, and it's celebration of their art. I mean, I guess we could sneak in an original tune there. That could be something in the shows.
When you come back, after everyone cheers you on and you come back on the stage, say, well, I'm going to take a little shit. Anyhow, can I talk to you a little sample? Well, what the people are going to get on that afternoon show on the 16th?
I've been thinking lately about the people I meet. The car wash on the corner and a hole in the street. The way my ankle shirt with shoes on my feet. And I'm wondering if I'm going to see tomorrow. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. All right. I was in the army, but I never dug a trench. Used to bust my knuckles on a monkey wrench. I go to town and drink, give the girls a pinch, but I don't think they ever even notice me. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Fish and whistle and fish. Eat everything that they put on your dish. When we get through, we'll make a big wish that we never have to do this again. Listen, my very first job I said thank you and please. They made me scrub a parking lot down on my knees. Then I got fired for being scared of bees, and they only gave me 50 cents an hour. Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. Go, Mark! Fish and whistle and fish. Eat everything that you put on your dish. When we get through, we'll make a big wish that we never have to do this again. Oh, Father, forgive us for what we must do. You forgive us and we'll forgive you. We'll forgive each other till we both turn blue. Then we'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. We'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. We'll whistle and go fishing in heaven. All right.
Thank you so much. They're just warming up.
Well, it's really been good talking with you. And I wish I was going to be in town on that Saturday afternoon. I'd come over, but I'm going to come see you. And I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your love of country music and your sharing your enthusiasm about these three great musicians, all of whom have spent some time in Chicago. And you got any parting words for your fans and listeners and would-be and future fans coming on and listening?
This show is about friendship. It's about the love that these guys had for each other. It's about the story that Kristofferson wouldn't have made it without Johnny Cash, for example. John Prine and Steve Goodman would, who knows, maybe wouldn't have made it without Kris Kristofferson. And those guys went on to do the same thing for hundreds of other musicians. So it's about friendship and encouragement and love. And we have a good time. Trust me, you'll like it.
Do you have any other gigs coming up where your band is playing that people should be aware of? And what is a good website for people to check you out?
Yeah, it's Friday night. We'll be at the Atlantic in Lincoln Square. We're going to be out in the suburbs a little bit. Main Street Outfitters in Wakanda. We're going to be at Happy's Bar in Cary. Probably for Chicago folks, the Montrose Saloon gig is the best shot for right now. But we every once in a while we do Martyrs or Fitzgerald's or some of these places. And the website is crazyheartmusic.com. So www.crazyheartmusic.com. All of these shows and all the information, videos, all up there.
Well, Mr. Crazy Heart, John Ballantyne, it's nice to meet you. I'll meet you in the flesh and not too far off, brother.
I sure hope so. Thank you so much for
Thank you. And everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're going to bring on a friend of the show, Don Rose, who was at the March on Washington in 1963. I was there too. And we're going to talk about the March on Washington at 60 years. Be right back with more Live from the Heartland. And we're bringing on someone who is a really good friend of the show. He comes on pretty much every time we invite him, and he's always got something going on. The one and only Don Rose, who sends out a weekly email with some really measured and on-target points and information that's real interesting. And this week, he had a link to his interview on CBS TV that was this week, talking about the March on Washington for Jobs and Justice, which took place on the 28th of August in the year 1963. You and I were both there. You came with a Chicago contingent. I drove down from Connecticut with two other guys in a Volkswagen. And what I remember is, as you got closer to DC, bus after bus after bus, there were just hundreds and hundreds of buses, thousands of people. And it was a very moving event when Dr. King gave the speech. So I've said enough, Don. Good afternoon to you. And tell us a little bit about what you remember about the March on Washington.
Well, I was one of the organizers of the Chicago area contingent, working with Timuel Black, the late Timuel Black, the late great Timuel Black, who was the chair of the March on Washington for this area. And we put together over a period of months. We started out trying to fill a train. We got a train chartered. Rail travel was quite a thing then. And we filled that up and wound up with a second chartered train. So there was about 1,000 people on each train. Plus, we estimate at least 500 and perhaps more Chicago area people came by air or car or bus or whatever. It was a hell of an organizing job, and a lot of the traditional civil rights people or so on were a little worried. They were happy to have Tim be the chair because he could take the blame if a lot of violence or anything broke out. There was all sorts of cautionary stuff about how bad this would be anyway. And of course, as you know, when we got there, it was just a marvelous thing. We stepped off the train, and all the different Chicago people from different cars broke up and started a march. And no one had ever been in a crowd like that. I mean, you were just in a sea of humanity, and it was buoyant and happy. People would bump into each other. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, and marching this way and that, and giving salutes and this and so on.
In case you're listening on the radio, he's showing a fist and a peace sign.
Right. and this was all signaling and talking to each other. I remember walking as we were marching toward the Lincoln Memorial. Tim had his younger son Timmy with him, and Tim was a short guy, so I had to carry Timmy Black on my shoulders so he could see the White House. That was one of the first thing I remember. Then the next thing, something that wasn't widely reported and didn't get into a lot of the commentaries, we got word that we knew John Lewis, representing SNCC, was going to be one of the speakers, and we got word that he had been censored. And we weren't sure what or why. We weren't sure what he said. And that was our concern as we drew closer. And then when he got to the memorial and the pond in front of him, and people sitting down, some of them taking off their shoes and socks and dipping their feet into the pond, it was just quite a sight. It was like a celebration. People were carrying all kinds of signs that were presented, and some homemade and so on. Somehow or another, most of the Chicago delegation pulled itself together fairly close to the memorial. You couldn't get right up against it, but we were fairly close and trying to buzz and figure out what John had said. Somebody said that I'm still not clear to this day exactly what the words were, but one was that he was a little critical of the Kennedy administration, and they thought that that would be offensive. I don't know exactly what he said. And then I also heard that he used the words marching through Georgia, which was going to sound too hostile. Anyway, it all came about. His speech was very good anyway.
Yeah, and he was a real hero of mine already then. And I remember reading an article, I think in the New York Times, that there was an issue with his speech. But back then, I remember SNCC was, they were the guys. They were the people I looked to the most in my early radical days. And so I was going to ask you about John Lewis, but you've already filled us in on that.
Yeah. Yeah, the groups, I think there were 10 official sponsors, which included the traditional civil rights groups like the NAACP and the Urban League and plus several labor unions. It was remember the March for Jobs and Justice, Jobs and Civil Rights, and everybody got to speak, and we expected a good speech from Dr. King, but the full impact of that speech didn't register for a while. We applauded and it sounded great and so on, and it took a while for all the words to sink in, and some of the more important words in it, which I cannot quote for you, went beyond the great dream. It was really quite a radical speech. I should hope. I mean, I think people have kind of toned his memory down and not try to play him as a little less radical than he actually was, because the entire speech should be immortalized, and we should teach the whole thing and not just I have a dream and use quotes about judging people by the content of their character. And he had much more to say in there.
King was,
they're trying to kill that history.
Yeah. No, I know it was a few years later that he came out against the war. I mean, it was a radical speech. I mean, just to link up the civil rights with jobs, and, the UAW and Walter Reuther were all there. There was a lot of labor support. I did get to give a speech with King at the Coliseum in, I think, April of 66. And he had just come out against the war at Riverside Church. And, King was something else. What do you think are the most important thing or for people to remember or know about that march in 63 before we get to the more current thing?
Well, I think, even though it was not popular, I don't remember polling, but most of the country didn't like it. Even the Sun-Times did a critical article about it and got marched on when we got off the trains. But I think the thing to remember was that it was, first of all, peaceful and a message to the government. And obviously, it really kicked Kennedy, who really wanted to be kicked, and he wanted to be urged, and we urged Kennedy on the Civil Rights Act. And I think the main thing to be remembered about it was that this is what launched the Civil Rights Act, and in a Congress that was very mixed, and eventually the Voting Rights Act. It took that kind of thing, and I think convinced a lot of other people, white population and questioning population, about the goals and what Black people really wanted. Of course, it also enraged the hostile people. We had a separations then too, but I guess one can look at it as the formal launching of the civil rights movement. These days we talk about the civil rights era, and that was kind of the launching point of the civil rights era. Ultimately, some people will date it back to the murder of Emmett Till, which was important, and really brought a lot of people together. But I think it was convincing enough to the government and to enough of America, so we can say that whatever progress we've made, we haven't made nearly enough, obviously, but it should be remembered for that. It was a peaceful petitioning of the government by the oppressed to drop the shackles. And what more can you ask?
No, it was great. It was probably one of the most wonderful things that I ever experienced. Let me ask you, you referred to the Voting Rights Act, and I'm kind of curious where you see us today. In the interview that you did for CBS that was on TV, and people can find it, they type in your name when they go to CBS. Where do you think, you in that interview, you talk about the guy, I'm sorry I don't remember his name, but where are we at, half full or half empty? And you thought where we're at on civil rights and on the justice question, a little more than half. I wonder, now that the Supreme Court has kind of decimated this Voting Rights Act, where do you think we're at, and what are the challenges that we have going forward?
Well, as I said in the thing, I don't know how clear I made it. For every step or two forward, we got kicked a step or two back. I think we continued to make progress. Let's just look in Chicago when we see how the grip of the old Daley machine, which was oppression, has been dropped. We elected a Black mayor in Chicago in 1983 and reelected him in 87, but that was done primarily with just the Black population. And, a small but important group of white friends making up about 10 or 12% of the total vote. We recently had an election where we elected our very next, after 87, really the first elected Black mayor, and his votes came from everywhere in the city.
They did.
It was a majority, and it included Latinos who earlier had voted really with the machine, and it included white people from all over, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, up there, and of course your 49th Ward has always been
fighting 49
in the vanguard. But if you just look at the spread of the vote there, you can call this progress. Now, obviously, one way of judging the progress is the extent of the fight back. Florida and other states trying to erase that history because they think that history is dangerous.
It hurts the feelings of white
fear more. We had the tragedy of that Donald Trump was able to name 3 Supreme Court justices, and that's a hang up that's going to be with us for a long, long time. They're all young, comparatively young, and that was probably when they gutted the center of the Voting Rights Act was probably the biggest cause for regression that we had since that march.
Well, do you got any words of optimism going forward? I mean, so far you've painted a picture about we're moving forward. We're more than half full on the glass, but I'm looking for a full glass of justice, positivity. Just we got to keep moving in a good direction. You got any parting words in our last minute or two here?
Well, I would say we keep organizing and fighting for that one or two steps forward, and we have to recognize that the more progress we make, there is this counter force, but we have always managed to get at least a step forward, even with those blows. Now we'll have a bit of a defining moment in the next election, to be sure, but about which I am slightly optimistic. I'm fearful, but I think it's another step forward, as the 20 election was. But it's a fight all the way.
Let me ask you just off the top here: do you think that Biden will run again? I mean, I'm rooting for him. I think he's done a lot better than we have expected. Sometimes he does look a little elderly and feeble. He's a little older than me. No, younger than me, and younger than you. But what's your sense on that? You think he will run?
At the moment, I have no reason to believe that he will not run. But it's day by day. You've got all these trials coming up. He does look weak at times, but he has always been a little odd. Most of the kinds of errors he's made that make him look bad and old are things that he was doing when he was 35 years old. He was never a great speaker. He'd always be tripping up on words. He was known for his gaffes, and certainly age has taken it. But having been 80 once myself, I don't think it's a debilitating matter.
Well, you're a hell of a guy, and it won't be long till we have you back on Live from the Heartland, because you've got a lot of information that I want to help you keep sharing, and I keep learning from you, and I'm glad to call you my friend. Thanks for coming on, Don.
Anytime, as long as I'm still here myself.
Well, keep working on it. I'm glad you quit smoking back in 60, whatever it was.
Kept me alive.
Okay. Hey, everybody. We want to thank you for tuning in to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 2nd. We're going to be back next week, and bet it'll be good. We've got someone coming on from Illinois Normal to kind of talk about where marijuana laws and the legalization has left normal in the state of marijuana in the state of Illinois. And we've got the people who are sailing the ship for peace around the Great Lakes coming on. So we'll be back next Saturday morning, or youtube.com/Heartland Media anytime, and TV on Thursday nights at 9 o'clock. I want to thank Tom Clark. I want to thank Katie Hogan, Lynn Auerman, all of our guests today, particularly Don Rose here, and our engineer, Hal James. So do good in the world. Remember that there is a future, and we help to shape it. And we'll see you next week. All power to the people.